Yep, I watched the final. Welcome to Rotted, review of the day, and today we're going to take a spoiler free look at the final. 2010 film directed by Joey Stewart, and let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to have a spoiler filled deep discussion video, as always, later on today, but this video is safe if you haven't seen it. Let's find out if you should. Uh, I kind of went into this movie not really knowing anything about it. The only thing I really knew about it was that it had 1 star out of 5, pulled from, I think it was an IMDb aggregate or possibly a Rotten Tomatoes, but that's usually more of a percentage thing. But regardless, I saw that it was rated a bit of a stinker. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, laying my cards out on the table here. I wanted to watch something that was potentially bad so that I could have some contrast going within this channel, right? So far, this is my fourth video, and I've had some good movies and I've had some neutral movies, uh, but I haven't had a bad movie, and I wanted to potentially have that, but it did not affect my judgment. I went into it with an open mind and no bias. I just wanted the opportunity to potentially have one. If it had surprised me, that would have been awesome. And it actually sounded like it might have started that way. I did have some mixed feelings towards it, and let's just go ahead and dive right into the review here. So, 5 different categories, as always, each category worth up to 20 points each for a possible total score of 100 points. And the first category we're going to be taking a look at is plot and subtext. Now, the general plot of this, again, spoiler free, is a group of picked on students at a high school decide to come up with a revenge plot against the football players, cheerleaders, people that picked on them. It's not an unfamiliar or entirely original plot device or idea. Um, the method that they went about it was apparently full of thought and planning, and ultimately, it some of it went to plan, some of it didn't. The events unfolded, characters turned on one another, and so on and so forth. And none of it was terribly compelling. Um, the portion of it in which I thought maybe this movie, I was really, for the first, I would say 15 or 20 minutes, I was wondering whether or not this movie was genius, legitimately genius. The acting in it was over the top, hammy, terrible, one dimensional characters entirely. The group of picked on students were absolutely no further developed than just angsty. The characters that were the bullies were just caricatures of themselves. And it got me to the point of wondering whether or not that was intentional. And there was a I have to think it was purposeful. And the the one element of the movie that I really liked, and it had me wondering if it was genius or not, was when the picked on students were present. Any adults that were in the shot had their faces obscured. Teachers would have their faces to the blackboard. Parents would have it hidden behind a newspaper or be working underneath a vehicle. It seems like purposefully, if not, it was a really interesting accident, but it purposefully made it seem like the students that were picked on were alone, that there was no outside help from adults. And that I thought was an interesting stylistic element that maybe this movie was self aware. But after that portion and things started really kicking off with the plan, it just took a steam dive down, just a terrible tumble down the old plot hill. and never really amounted to a whole lot. We'll go ahead and get into details of that in the deep dive discussion, but I had to give the plot no higher than a 5 out of 20. I could see what it was doing. It stayed on its own rails, but it just wasn't. It wasn't compelling in any way. Intent. I have trouble with this one. I don't know what its intent was. There was no mystery behind it. Some of the best horror films are, at the very core of themselves, mysteries, or at the very least, have you wondering what's going to happen next. And this was just, nope, we are picked on. We are coming up with this plan for revenge. We are going to execute this plan, and we are now executing this plan. It was just very straightforward, and it also, at the same time, was held back. If it was supposed to be just a torture porn revenge kind of movie, it didn't really deliver on that front. A lot of shots were held back, and shots were even plagiarized, and I really am going to be marking it down for that. There, without giving anything away, there was a scene in this movie that is identical in uh, in methodology, if not tone. Definitely not tone, but methodology. That is plagiarism of a scene from one of my favorite movies, Audition, which is Japanese. I believe is a Takashi Miike film, and it tried to emulate that to the point of ripping it off, while also offering none of the punch in the gut gravitas that the original movie had. It's like it just went through the numbers expecting that to be enough, and it just wasn't. So, 4 on intent. I could see what it was trying for, but whatever it was trying for, it failed. So, yeah. Acting, laughable. Absolutely laughable. Again, it had me thinking towards the beginning that maybe that was purposeful. Maybe it was trying for an over-the-top performance. A little bit of the, the girls that picked on Carrie kind of thing going. But no, it just was not very good. And the writing didn't do it any favors either. I think at some point I just had to shut down a little bit. When you have an entire room of victims that are, caught in the trap of this plan, talking maybe 15 different people, and they're all chained, and they're dealing with them one by one. And every single one has 10 minutes of monologuing to it. Do you know why we're doing this to you? Do you know what your sin is? Let me go through and explain it in gruesome, terrifying detail that isn't terrifying in the slightest. Oh, just get on with it. Torture these people and let's roll the credits. It just was terrible in the monologuing and the acting and the dialogue, and just ugh. So 5 out of 20 for that, and honestly, that's probably being pretty generous. Regardless, the effects, again, not a whole lot to really be wowed by here. This actually probably gets my highest score of the grouping at a 6 out of 20. Nothing there that was terribly convincing. Obvious prosthetics, obvious makeup, and it's difficult to really judge because, like I said, for a torture porn horror revenge kind of movie, it held itself back, where other movies would stay on a shot and make you wince. This would just try to Alfred Hitchcock it, and with none of the nuance of Hitchcock. The camera would pull away, you would hear it, the bad acting would take over, and you would just roll your eyes. I could not get into this one. I could not forgive this one. And Fear Quotient, you know what? I just gave that a big old goose egg. That it wasn't scary, it wasn't cringy, it wasn't gross, it wasn't any of the things that I would attribute to a good horror experience. It didn't rivet me. There was nothing about it at all that was scary, and most of it had me pulled out of the movie by rolling my eyes and wondering what in the heck these characters are doing. Why are they doing it this way? Why aren't they fighting back? Why aren't they doing this? I spent so much time trying to figure out why in the world people were acting the way that they were, why they were saying the things they were saying, that I had no immersion whatsoever. And immersion is the key to fear. If you're going to be involved or to be scared by a horror movie, you need to be immersed in it. And this just kept pulling me out of it by the sheer stupidity. Yeah, obviously, I didn't care for it. Total of 20 points out of 100, and honestly, I probably was a little generous with that. Would I recommend the final? Clearly not. Yeah, I mean, even as a popcorn, kickback kind of movie, you know what it would be good for is to sit down with some friends and just have a good laugh. Pick it apart. Join Tom Servo back there and really have some ham-fisted fun with it. So anyway, yeah, that was the final. We're gonna have a deep dive discussion. I'm gonna kind of dissect it a little bit more and go over more detailed plot points of whatever plot there was. So remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.